Welcome to Disabilities Journal. I'm John DiBiase. This show is part of a series about disabilities that aren't always visible. We've spoken about people who are in wheelchairs and have disabilities that are of a nature that you could see somebody walking down the street and say, gee, they have a disability. Not all disabilities are visible, and today's show is about dementia, Alzheimer's, and related issues. And I have with me Julie Wexler, Director of Business Development at the Bristol, and Tori Cohen, Executive Director of Long Island Alzheimer's and Dementia Center. We'll be discussing Alzheimer's and dementia, and when a family member receives that diagnosis, it's very scary and confusing. Recently, we've read about Bruce Willis and his front temporal dementia, and it's something that we never heard of. As I said off camera, when you Google FTD, you get the florist. But until this famous person is diagnosed, no one's really familiar with it. There's lots of information out there. Lots of people are diagnosed now with dementia that we didn't know about 30 years ago. Could you talk to us a little bit about why so many people are diagnosed with dementia, what the diagnoses are, what mistakes are made in diagnosis?
Sure. The fact is that people are living much longer. So many diseases have cures at this point. So sometimes where people were in their later years and dying earlier, now people are getting cures from their doctors. So there's more people that are around starting to experience different symptoms that they might not have if they had been a couple years down the road. And the fact is that most people really need to go to a neurologist or to their geriatrician, which is a doctor that specializes in geriatrics. Those are two main doctors for when people need to look for a diagnosis. So the fact is that Alzheimer's and dementia, dementia is a condition that's characterized by a persistent loss in cognitive impairment and personality changes and abstract thinking. And people, when they start to notice some of these symptoms, they get worried and they, start to think like, what do I have and what's going on? But we really need to be careful, and that's why we do need to go to a doctor, because there's a lot of different symptoms that can be related to another diagnosis. So we usually say you need to get a differential diagnosis and find out what's going on. Is it vitamin deficiency? Is it maybe, unfortunately, a brain tumor? Is there something else that's going on, a UTI that is making someone have these symptoms?
Okay. Differential diagnosis. That's not a word that we use at the bar over a beer, say, oh, I have a differential diagnosis. Could you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a term that I even remember when I was working in the hospital. It's differential is really differentiating between different diagnoses. So we really can be certain. In the end of the day, it's always with these diagnoses that you need a brain autopsy to give you the 100% clarity, but there's so much testing that goes on that we are pretty sure. But just for the audience, in knowing about dementia, Alzheimer's, and other forms of dementia, dementia is like a top of an umbrella, and the fact is there's so many different forms of dementia. You mentioned Bruce Willis, that's frontal temporal dementia. There's vascular dementia that has to do with when people have strokes. They're, talking about famous people. There was Robin Williams, and he had Lewy body dementia, which is characterized by a lot of hallucinations. So Alzheimer's is just another form of dementia, but it's really the one that you hear of most of the time.
We can't make light of the fact that it's very scary. It's very scary for families. Families get confused as much as the poor person who has the dementia. What do I do? How do I take care of this? The first thing you think of is, what can I do to cure this? Because you always want to stop it before, that's the first instinct.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's most frightening for families is in many cases there is no cure. A lot of the medications that are prescribed are really designed to keep the person functioning at the highest level for as long as possible, or to slow down the disease process. But there is no cure for Alzheimer's disease. And so it's so important for early diagnosis to make sure that the diagnosis happens so that the family can be in control. Because there are a lot of conversations, very, very difficult conversations that families have to have, because this is just the beginning of their journey. We don't know how long the journey is going to be. Sometimes the disease progresses very quickly in people. Sometimes it's a very slow progression, but it's really important to have difficult conversations and to seek out help and support. I think with a lot of diseases, somebody gets a diagnosis of heart disease and, the doctor writes a prescription and this is, something tangible that you can do. But with Alzheimer's disease, a lot of the things are not tangible. It's things like seeking out legal and financial advice. It's about joining a caregiver support group. It's about accessing adult daycare. It's about getting counseling not only for the person with the diagnosis, but the family caregiver, because this is a disease that affects not only the individual, but the entire family. And it's about educating yourself about what the resources are that are available to you right now and being realistic. What are the resources that you're going to need down the road, because this is not going to get better?
I think that's a really serious part of it. What am I going to need down the road? And I keep talking about denial, and because it is a denial thing. I know personally people who have a wife or a husband who have dementia, and they kind of skip over it. And in fact, one woman I know has had Alzheimer's, was diagnosed 5 years ago, and they're aged, and it's not so much, they recognize that there's an issue, but it's, well, we've gotten to 5 years, so we're kind of lucky. And we'll just keep doing it until whatever happens, happens. But whatever happens, happens is not a really good way to look at things, because that,
Yeah. And, this generation, the generation that we work with at the Bristol, that Tori works with at the Long Island Alzheimer's and Dementia Center, think about it. It's the first generation in the history of humanity to live as long as they have. And we know, as Tori mentioned before, the biggest risk factor for Alzheimer's or dementia is age. Couple that with the baby boomers, and we have a major health crisis about to hit the United States in the coming years. And so important for families to be realistic about what is down the road and educating yourself about what the available care options are, because a lot of the care options also cost a lot of money. And so
let's talk about care options. I know that I've been lucky enough, you gave me a tour of the Bristol one day, and I was like, okay, I'm moving in today. It's a really beautiful setting. Not all facilities are really beautiful settings. And that's just a realistic thing. It's just the way life is. Let's talk about some of the types of care that are available. I've been diagnosed. I'm now at a point where my family can't take care of me anymore. And what happens?
So one thing I just wanted to go back for 1 second, though, to what Julie said, because I think one of the most important things, many important things that Julie said, but education is important about this disease, because when we talk about families and like you had described people being scared, it's a cultural thing. It's a denial part where a lot of times when people are living with their loved one who's having these symptoms, they try to cover it up. They may, it may not be so obvious. So there's a lot of issues that go along that may stop someone from really reaching out to have help. But what we're here, what Julie and I are here for, is making people feel comfortable that it's okay. you should not do this alone. This is why you have resources like this. So the fact is that when you have people that finally make that call or come in to talk about these resources, we really do need to identify who the family is, what they're going to be able to need along the road. And you don't want to scare people either. You want to be able to take it slow. So, for us, yes, we might get that first call at our organization on the phone of, I have this diagnosis, now what? We really do take the time to think about, okay, well, here's an organization like ours that's trying to help people live in the community, age in place is what they say, age in place. But we have, day programs that can help the person that's diagnosed, and then their caregiver can get relief. We can talk about if they say, well, we're sort of already past that. Here are some options, like here's Julie Wexer at the Bristol. Here are assisted livings that have special memory units that can take people in. It's really kind of identifying what people need at that moment and taking those next steps. Because there's a lot of resources out there for them to listen to and understand what's right for them.
And that's a good point, right?
Yeah.
Different choices for different families, and a lot of factors are going to go into families making those choices on the kinds of services that they access. Financial is going to be one of them, but maybe it's just family preference or the structure of the family. If you're going to keep the person at home, is there somebody who can kind of take charge and help to manage all that? Is there a spouse or an adult child who has the flexibility with his or her work schedule to be able to care for somebody who needs 24-hour supervision? And so, I know my goal, and I'm sure it is for Tori and her staff as well, is to just always give people all the options and to make sure that they understand the options before they make those decisions.
Go ahead, Tori.
And I was just going to say, adding to that, people may walk in or make that first call and they think that they are heading down one road. And I think our clarity on what's going on with even their loved one may be a lot different than they see. We've come into a lot of families that they believe maybe their loved one is, not as progressed as they thought they were in different stages. So our role is to really, as much as we can, bring them to reality with tender, loving care, not making them, feel uncomfortable about it.
I think that's part of the scariness, is that we don't want to recognize that our mom or dad or our spouse is as sick as they really are. We always try to minimize, and this is with pretty much anything, unless you're in the end stages of a disease. But we want to try to minimize. We want to try to recapture the innocence, and that's not the right word, but the innocence of the relationship. Okay. Yeah. What do we do to preserve that as much as possible?
Because I feel like we're talking a lot about fear right now.
But fear is a big part of the disease. Let's change gear, please. Go ahead.
So I feel like we need to also talk about hope, right?
Yeah.
We need to make sure that the caregiver gets the support and the family gets the support and education that they need. Because there still can be moments of joy, and there still can be moments of happiness, and still continuing to live life with dignity and with purpose. And that's what a lot of really well-designed programs will help families and individuals diagnosed with dementia do: to live with purpose, to live with dignity, and to live with hope, because it can be, like I said before, a long journey, and that's what we need.
I think that you just hit the nail right on the head. Is let's get away from the inevitable, and let's live for now. Okay, Jimmy Buffett has a wonderful song, and he says, "I have a watch, and it just says now. There's no hands." And maybe we need a watch without hands. in this case.
But Julie's right, because really with every conversation with people that call in and our caregivers, we always say that there's hope, and that's what an organization like ours is there for, because we always say we're focusing on people's abilities and not their disabilities, and we really don't know how long someone's disease lasts and whatever stage they're going to be in, because if we knew that much, we would, be in a different state. So utilizing programs that can help and give their loved one hope and do things and be involved at our center. They could be involved. We have constant entertainment, constant music. We have a lot of art therapy. We have a lot of pet therapy. We have a lot of activities that are trying to keep people as stimulated as they can. And really, in the end, because we focus on the beginning stages of the disease to the end, we could have people that are very involved, very verbal, very active, and we can have people that are maybe not as verbal and just around others is a huge part of this disease. It really still, to me, like we say, it's not a cure, as Julie had said before, and we are not at that place, but we are where we could help people in this period of time feel very good about themselves and for their caregivers, that they see what they're doing, know that they're being taken care of, and then the caregiver also can get that relief when they're leaving their loved one there.
The relief of leaving a loved one and saying goodbye and saying, well, this is where you live now and I don't necessarily live with you. And we know that there are places where spouses can live together, where they could still maintain that relationship. We also, I ran an agency that served folks with developmental disabilities. And one of my pet projects was looking at folks with developmental disabilities as they age and how they may age differently. And one of the things I came up with was that they don't age as much differently than we do. My dad, I love my dad. He would love to sit, talk with the grandkids, talk with me about baseball, and sit in his chair, have a couple of beers, and that was his enjoyment. My mother had to be at Macy's, at Roosevelt Field. She had to be someplace, okay? And I think that I know that the folks that I served with developmental disabilities were the same way. Some of them wanted to just sit and have coffee and talk, and others wanted to go out and see whatever they could see. Is it like that with somebody with Alzheimer's?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the benefits of a program like Tori's, where the person has a place to go. We all want that sense of belonging, that sense of a reason to get up every day, to get dressed and to walk out the door, to establish that routine and that structure. And that's why adult daycare programs are so important and helpful in almost as a treatment for the disease. Because then when you get there, right, you have your music, you have your art, you have the socialization piece, similar to what we do in assisted living. Making sure that, yes, we want to make sure everyone has their medication and everyone, is clean and their clothes are taken care of and they're having their 3 meals a day. But it's the socialization. It's being around other people and the structure that can be almost the treatment for Alzheimer's disease. So that's similar to what Tori and Tori's program and assisted living can do.
Let me ask you a wild question. Well, it's maybe not that wild. I enjoy playing guitar. Eric Clapton sleeps well, knowing that I'm never going to threaten him. Do people with Alzheimer's still play the guitar?
They can.
Yeah. No. Like I know you pick up the guitar and still strum a tune.
So what happens with many forms of dementia is it's the short-term memory that tends to be affected first. Okay. Right. So you might remember all the details of the birth of your first child or your wedding 40 or 50 years ago. But did you take your medication this morning? What did you have for breakfast? Did you put your dirty clothes in the laundry? It's the things that have happened in the recent past that become elusive. Interestingly, and I'm sure Tori sees this as well, the music center of the brain, for whatever reason, and I don't pretend to be a neuropsychologist or anything, but the music center of the brain tends to not be affected by Alzheimer's disease. And so somebody who even loses their ability to communicate, not only to understand language, but to express language, or might not be able to dress themselves anymore or even tie their shoes, play some of those childhood tunes or those old patriotic songs, they know every single word. And the music reaches something in them, right? Music brings you back, right, to happier times, to times when we were kids and meaningful times. So music, once again...
It depends on the song. Sometimes it's not.
Music can be such a therapeutic activity for people with dementia.
And I think when Julie says that, it brings me back to a memory of an individual that was at our center, that she really was progressing pretty quickly with her dementia, but she used to be an opera singer and she used to play the piano. And, you know, one day we have a piano at LIAD, the Long Island Alzheimer's Dementia Center, and she just sat down, started playing, and just started belting out tunes. And that was, you know, one of those aha moments, you know, which then, of course, it happened that her husband ended up saying these kind of things were, you know, happening at home, that you really, you know, saw this is this person. She's still there, regardless of all these other things happening. And those are those moments where you really do want to see your loved one still enjoying what they used to be doing and really going back to that hope that just because they're diagnosed does not mean that their life is over.
So there are actually times, we know what the end result is going to be, and that's not a happy result. But there are times along the way that are inspirational, or respites from the end result. Let's talk a little bit about guilt. I'm bringing you to a home and I'm saying goodbye.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard for families to relinquish sharing the care, right? Because this is my husband, I have to take care of him, or this is my mother, she took care of me, and now it's my turn to take care of her. But Alzheimer's disease and dementia kind of give the family circumstances that are very difficult, and it's okay to share the care. And if you've done your research and you know that you've found a program, an assisted living with well-trained staff that is going to provide your loved one with the dignity and the purpose and all those things we talked about before, it does exist out there. And you have to be willing to share, because we know that very often it's the caregiver who ends up getting sick, who ends up passing away because of the stress and that it gives you when you are the primary caregiver and you don't get the support that you need.
Yeah, it's the primary caregivers definitely get. Yeah,
well,
go ahead, Tori.
No, I was going to say, I mean, that is, if anything, so super important, caregiver burnout. And that's why there are places of sitting in a support group, talking to people that are even not your family members, just about what you're feeling, being honest, being transparent. Like Julie says, sharing the care, but it's also sharing the feeling. It's okay that you may be making this decision to take your loved one out of the home and place them. It's okay, and you're allowed to say that out loud, because I do think most of the time when we're not focused on the caregiver who is worried about the person that's diagnosed, not going to doctor's appointments, then not taking care of themselves, they may be the one that we say does pass away, and then we have to have that other plan of, well, then who is taking care of the person, and which role is that of that family?
So at the Bristol, we have a publication called The Talk.
Okay.
And this is like the reverse talk, not the talk that we're having with our kids, but the talk that we're going to have with our parents. And it really is designed to get people thinking that these are very tough conversations, but they need to happen. And regardless of whether or not the person has a dementia diagnosis, even for our parents who are just elderly, you know, people don't want to talk about those kinds of things. But there are a lot of decisions that have to be made, and we want the aging person or the person who has a diagnosis of dementia to have as much control over their life as they possibly can. And we can only help them live the life that they want if we've had the conversation with them.
Right, so that they're part of the decision making.
Well, I always say that we have to be proactive, not reactive. And I always say that to every family, because we have to try and work on what we can. This part we have control over, the disease we don't. We have control over what we need to do in order of resources and support. So
my sons have told me they're going to put me on an ice floe. And I said, no, I really don't like the cold. Can you just put me on a desert island? I'd rather at least. We're coming down to like the end of the show. We have some time left. So closing thoughts. How do we pay for this? How do we pay for the Bristol?
Closing thoughts. This is a whole other show.
I know it's a whole nother show.
Yeah.
Real quick.
All right. So real quick, there are different ways of paying for long-term care, right? So, and that's what when you have a dementia diagnosis, it's the custodial needs that the person has, right? The need for socialization, the need with assistance with activities of daily living, the need for supervision. Medicare, typical insurance, doesn't cover those costs. Medicare is health insurance. You get sick, it will help you. But for your long-term care needs, Medicare is not designed for that. So how do we pay for long-term care? Either paying privately. So those of us who are fortunate enough to have savings, good pensions, income, a home to sell, those are the resources that people use to pay for living at the Bristol. So traditionally, the Bristol is a private pay organization, and most people on Long Island are selling their family house that is no longer serving their needs, and that's how they're able to afford to live at the Bristol. If you don't have the private pay resources to be able to pay privately, there are some assisted living communities that do accept Medicaid, this is a whole education. So maybe we can come back and
you can come back.
Have that.
I'd love to have you guys back.
Maybe Tori has some other maybe long-term care insurance is another way that people pay for long-term care.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and as Julie says, if people just trying to get even the care and coming to a program like ours in the community, yes, people can privately pay, but we also can get funding from the county and just different resources and supports that we look out to try and help these individuals get this care, because we don't want people to not be able to get the care that they deserve. So we always are here to figure out what options are relevant and which ones can help each individual and their family.
Great. On that thought, I have to say goodbye to both of you. And I really enjoyed chatting with you. And thank you very much. I want you to come back.
Thank you.